Samen met Bozar organiseert A+ voor de 4e keer een A+Talk, een thematische lezing over een bouwmateriaal. Dit jaar zijn verschillende sprekers uitgenodigd om dieper in te gaan op het gebruik van baksteen in architectuur. Wat eveneens het hoofdthema is van de pas verschenen tijdschriftnummer A+ 2094 Back to Brick. Ce dernier numéro paru de la revue A+, consacré à l'utilisation de la brique, se trouve par ailleurs en vente ce soir au bookshop de Beaux-Arts à l'étage. Les deux architectes invités ce soir vont nous faire part de leur façon d'utiliser la brique en architecture et les défis que cet élément constructif induit dans leur pratique. David Sebastian spreekt vanavond als eerste en zal enkele van zijn projecten voorstellen. Hij richtte zijn bureau op in 2001 in Barcelona. Zijn werk, voornamelijk woonprojecten en scholen, werd in 2012 tentoongesteld op de Biennale van Venetië. Het jaar daarop werd hij genomineerd voor de Mies van der Rohe Award. David Sebastian nous expliquera entre autres ce qui l'a motivé à utiliser des briques locales de façon expérimentale dans le projet House in Three Springtimes. Et ensuite, l'architecte, enseignante et chercheuse indienne Anupama Kundoo poursuivra la soirée en présentant son travail qu'elle aborde avec une approche durable basée sur l'expérimentation et la réutilisation des matériaux. Les recherches qu'elle mène sur les technologies de construction lui valent l'obtention en 2021 du prix Auguste Perret pour la technologie architecturale. Anupama Kundoo's international bijdrage aan de architectuurtheorie en praktijk werd vorig jaar opnieuw gelauwerd met de Riba Charles Jenks Award. Na de duo-lezing gaan de twee bureaus dieper in op de impact die het gebruik van baksteen kan hebben op architectuur. Het gesprek wordt gemodereerd door Lieve Nijs van het Gentse architectuurbureau BLAF en docent aan de UGent. En om de Belgische context verder toe te lichten, vervoegt ook Tom Verschuren van DMVA uit Mechelen ons bij het gesprek. Avant de donner la parole aux différents intervenants, nous tenons à remercier Beaux-Arts pour avoir coproduit cet événement, ainsi que le sponsor principal de cette conférence, la Fédération belge de la brique, la Fédération Wallonie-Bruxelles, de Vlaamse Overheid, la région de Bruxelles-Capitale et la ville de Bruxelles. Cet événement a lieu en collaboration avec l'Université de Gand UGent, qui organise aussi un colloque, Bonding Brick No. 4, sur le même sujet le 24 mars prochain. And now I give the floor to David Sebastian, and I wish you all a very good lecture.
Good evening. First of all, I would like to thank to A+ the invitation for this lecture. Belgium, it's a very special place for me. I live here, well, in Ghent, for 1 year, when I was finishing my architectural studies. I haven't spoken English very much since then, so I'll try to do my best. And it's nice to meet again with Lieve Nijs, an architect that I met 3 years ago in Denmark, also in a symposium of architecture on bricks, and I really appreciate his work. And of course, thanks for sharing this lecture with Anupama Kundoo. 10 years ago, I was in the Venice Biennale representing Catalonia in the first Catalan pavilion with another 8 architects. And that year, Anupama was in the Arsenale with a big model, 1:1 scale of her wall house project. And I was really impressed with the installation. So it's an honor for me to be here today with her and have the chance of know more about her architecture. Today, I'm going to talk about a project we finished 3 years ago. It's a very small and personal house that we call House in Three Springtimes. First, I'm going to explain the house in a very easy way. And then I'm going to try to explain the process, how it was done. The house in 3 springtimes is the summer house, a summer house in Jarque de la Val, a very little town in Teruel, in a very unpopulated area of Spain, more than 4 hours from Barcelona by car. The town has only 66 inhabitants, most of them old people. With a density of 2.3 inhabitants per square kilometer, is part of this España vacía, empty Spain, also called Southern Lapland. The house is designed to get together 3 families, mainly once a year, and in the month of August. The goal is an economic and functional house with maximum shade to combat the strong summer heat. It is built with a very low budget, with few means and local people, and in different phases, short and intermittent periods with the arrival of good weather and with the architect always on site. It's a slow-cooked project, built over 3 springtimes. Well, the house is built occupying an old corral in which there was a barn, a small construction with 2 levels, one for the animals in the ground floor, another for the storage of grain in the first floor. The stone walls and the boot beams have been kept in their original position. Is the geometry of these elements what shapes the overall volume of the project. It determines the inclination of the roof and the dimensions of the interior court. The plot is located on the edge of the village, where the houses end and the orchards and fields begin. The house is protected in plan and adopts a U shape. In this way, it avoids the visual contact with the neighboring houses and opens toward the landscape. At the same time, generates a patio, a courtyard in the center. The whole house is topped by a very simple sloping roof. The patio is also covered and becomes a kind of indoor volume, which remains always protected and shaded. The volume of the patio equals to 1/3 of the total. All the external woodwork faces to the patio, and it's also protected from the water and sun. That's very practical because they can be very simple, and some of them even recycled. In fact, we could consider that all the woodwork is internal woodwork. The access is through a large and recycled coral door. When it is open, it becomes an area to sit down or stop to talk with the neighbors that at the entrance, which is the very common activity in the town. This space communicates with the patio passing under the house. The patio is the heart of the house, the most used and most polyvalent space. The most of the day is shade and well ventilated. This is the access on the right side to the common areas, to the other side to the 3 rooms separately. The common area is situated inside the thick stone walls of the old construction, which is also semi-varied. These zones maintains a constant cool temperature, always around 25 degrees in summer. It contains the dining room area, also is the patio, which is used the most of the times. The kitchen, well, in fact, there are 2 kitchens in one to allow the use of several people at the same time. And a wooden mezzanine with the living area that is also used as a study and play area for children. The 3 bedrooms are situated in the opposite side of the patio, 1 single room in the ground floor and 2 family rooms in the first floor. They are built with brick, with a single layer of thermoarcilla, thermoclay. And these walls are, of course, less insulating than the stone walls, but enough to insulate from the sun during the day and accumulate some heat that is liberated at night. This works very well because at night the temperature drops a lot and it's usually quite cold. That's because we have to think that the town is at 1,300 meters altitude. The access to the bedrooms is by external staircase that it was a motel. The rooms are focused on the landscape, and they have 2 levels, one downstairs for parents and another upstairs for kids. These 2 levels are built with a wooden superstructure and communicates internally with a staircase, also made of wood. The wooden superstructure occupies the highest part of the house, taking advantage of the space that remains under the sloping roof. The interior divisions were made with wooden frames that were later covered with recycled wood to make the railings. In the future, these divisions will allow us to split each room in 2 if we want. Well, I have to say that a few months before starting the construction, I didn't have a clear idea of what materials I would use to build the house, neither which would be the constructive system. The answer to these questions arrived in a very simple and natural way during the previous visits in the site. While traveling through the surrounding villages and visiting the local warehouses and material stores, but especially looking for the builders who could work in the house. I remember very well this day. I was talking with Puyo, a brick lawyer who was doing small things in the area. He explained to me that the thermoclay was used a lot, especially because it was a large piece and allowed them to work very fast. And then, casually, he said, what I do is take the 24 centimeters depth thermoclay, because like Hero is 24 centimeters long, it allows me to combine 2 pieces so I don't have to cut. Exactly, the thermoclay piece of 24 centimeters combined long and height perfectly with Hero, so that 1 piece of thermoclay equals to 6 pieces of Hero. Thermoclay is the big piece, of course, and the brick, the more little brick, is the we call them Hero. He also explained to me that the prestressed concrete beams with a height of 20 made 12 in the base, so 2 beams are also made 24 centimeters, and as well as the thermoclay and Hero. Finally, the band piece also makes 24 bottom by 20 centimeters height. Well, it was a conversation about just 30 minutes in which we took bricks and put them on the ground, making one-on-one models of different situations. We also made some drawings in a wooden board that was in the site. And in these drawings, for me, everything was already there. In fact, I saw that with that unique constructive detail, the house could be built. Finally, we chose this brick lawyer and his assistants to do the work. They were a group of 3-4 people from Romania and living in Teruel. They work a lot for the people of the area, doing basically reforms and partial repairs of houses. They work for hours, 16 euros per hour, 10 hours a day, almost non-stop. In this case, the fact of charging for hours is decisive because the simpler was the construction, the faster they could work. And the faster they work, the cheaper the house could be. And the fact that the constructive system that we choose was very common for them, allowed to advance very fast and therefore economize the construction. The idea was to build like a Lego, fitting pieces without having to cut them, building a system of walls of 24 centimeters depth and with horizontal join rhythm every 20 centimeters. The combination of thermoclay with Hero allows to solve walled ends and corners in different ways, but always without having to cut pieces. It was about doing what they always did, but with the difference that it could be to be seen. The same system, but with good lyrics. And also, in the same way that happens in Lego, we were building the structure of walls at the same time that we built the exterior finish and the interior finish. That was also very good for the project because it accentuated the confusion between inside and outside. I have to say that it wasn't the first time that I used this kind of solutions or materials. We had some previous experience. This is a project that we did about 10 years ago. It's a kindergarten near Barcelona. It was the first time we experienced it with this kind of basic bricks, and was something unexpected. It was not planned in the project, but it was a very important element in the final result because of the circumstances of the construction process. We had to build a new school by expanding an existing building, but finally a large part of this building, it was an old house, could not be saved and was necessary to demolish and rebuild the 50% of the volume. If we had to remake the volume in this previous form, we wanted to differentiate the original parts from the reconstructed ones. So we convinced the builder and the town hall to make the walls with a conventional brick, but without the final coating. We chose this brick with scratches that was already there. New textures appear, and then also new combinations. And we realized they were materials that were not very experienced at this final finish, but they could have a great power of expression. It was a special result with a piece that we had very close, so very easy, very cheap, and without having to design it. We like the result so much that we decided to use it on the rest of the walls of the new construction and also in the perimeter of the site. Now we return to the house in the springtime and the towns around. Normally, the towns around have two sides. A side designed to show the others that faces the street, with a finish that wants to be novel, generally smooth, revoked, painted, with conventional windows and doors, and formally very similar to each other. But there is another side in these towns, the back side of the village, the one that generally faces to patios and orchards, normally the part of the house where there is more life. It's a facade that is not thought to be seen by others, but are the places where more things happen, and from my point of view, where the most interesting things happen. Because there we find a more functional architecture, more direct, more honest, responding in a clear way to the needs of the users. More generous openings appear, terraces, overhangs. There are more volumes, voids, shadows. The materials are simple, but they are shown without any problem. We can find many original solutions, different textures and all kinds of experiments. Many types of ceramic pieces are used, especially in their most basic versions. It is also the building way that it's used in the repairs of old houses or buildings for tools, vehicles, agricultural machinery, or animals. It is obvious that people think that it's not, from the town, think that it's an unfinished architecture, that it's not to be seen, not to show. But it's also obvious that it's part of the landscape of the villages that has been knit and mixed with the old stone walls, and it's part of the rural landscape. Bricks and pre-stressed beams have been natural substitutes of stone walls and wooden beams since the post-war period until today. But is this vernacular architecture? Vernacular architecture means working with what we have closer, which is easier to build and cheaper. These were the criteria which the town was built. During centuries, that meant building with stone, wood, and mud. In fact, these were the only materials that they had and were extracted directly from the environment. The result was an architecture integrated into the landscape and without architects. The vernacular now is not so clear. The vernacular now has the problem of globalization, the acceleration of the last years, the excess of supply, the lack of criteria, and the results are unpredictable. I could show you examples of houses built in the last few years in villages around with very strange criteria, but I prefer to give you another example. It's the example of the botijo. A botijo is a container that is used to keep the water cool. Until recently, the botijos in Jarque were like that. They were made of porous baked clay, and its operation was apparently simple. The stored water is filtered through the pores of the clay, and in contact with the external dry environment, evaporates, producing a cooling. The key to cooling is therefore in the evaporation of the water. When it evaporates, it extracts part of the thermal energy from the water inside the botijo. The more heat, the more the water evaporates, and therefore the more water inside cools down. Both the material and the operation can be explained from the site and from the climate. Now the botijos in Jarque are made like this. When someone from the village has to make a new roof or reparation, a truck comes with a person who projects polystyrene with a hose. Then people of the town take the chance of approach with all kinds of plastic containers. They place them on the ground, and they are covered with projected polystyrene. And the result is this: plastic and polystyrene that acts like insulation and only keeps the water cool for a few hours and has a very short life. Conclusion: in the past, vernacular architecture drove us to answers that were sustainable, functional, based on experience, and in relation to the environment. But in fact, they were doing just what was easier and more economical. Now, the easiest and most economical, many times drive us to all kinds of answers. Architecture based on the circumstances of the moment, not sustainable, and sometimes even not functional. There is not just one solution for every question. Now it's necessary to choose how and with what to build. And we have to know how to choose well. That's the role of the architect. And that's why the role of the architect is now more necessary than ever. Well, talking about vernacular or popular architecture, I would like to do a little parenthesis just to show you some images from another project we did some years ago. It's the School of Art and Design in Amposta in the south of Catalonia. It is situated in the limit between the city and the delta of the river Ebro. That means two scales, an industrial environment typical of the periphery with light metal buildings, but directly in contact with small agricultural constructions, farms, and self-built architecture. In this case, we use these basic bricks that we can see everywhere in the delta. We use it in part of the facades and in part of the interior walls, but also to improve the acoustics, or solve the air conditioning return here, or to ventilate the room installations. Some of these solutions were not in the initial project, but the continued contact with the construction materials and with the most immediate environment make the result look like this. Continuing with the project in the house in the springtimes interval, the construction materials for working in these villages were basically obtained in the local building yards. There were small stores in Utrilla, Montalban, Aliaga, little towns about 20 minutes, and in Teruel, the capital, at 40 minutes. Depending on the warehouse, you could find more or less variety of materials from different parts of Spain. But what it always was in stock were the basics: ceramics, bricks like thermoclay and hero, prefabricated concrete products, and wood. If I used these materials, I could always have material available at any time. And for the construction dynamic that I was going to have, that was a great advantage. The house in 3 springtimes, as its name indicates, was built during 3 years, between the months of April and July approximately, from Easter to summer. It is the time of the year when, after an extremely cool winter, people return to the village and the outdoor activity is restart. They work in the orchards, in the forest, in the fields. The construction periods were usually 1 week, which was the maximum time I could afford to escape from Barcelona. And the frequency depended on time they could dedicate, my personal circumstances and the weather, etc. But normally was every 3 weeks. So the rhythm of the work was slow, intermittent, but very intense during the days that we were working. They only worked when the architect, me in that case, was there. But when I was there, I was all the time. This constant presence in the site and the intermittent and slow rhythm of the works is very important in the final result of the project. It allowed us to change, improvise sometimes, and experiment during the process. In fact, if we think like a film director, the process was more like a documentary than like a movie. I mean, with a quite clear start ideas, with a start project, but with an open system in which reality and improvisation fit, and many times were the protagonist. During this process, we incorporate some pieces found in the construction warehouses, like ceramic steps, stock remains, things that I didn't know even that exist. We also found into the barn a large number of old woodwork that had been saved from the homes demolished around. And we decided to catalog and reuse them. They solve doors and windows, but they were also recycled as interior divisions, balusters, shooters, etc. Of course, we also recycled stone, wood, and tiles from the demolished areas of the barn. But we recycled in a calm way. I mean, we simply reused what we had to close and could serve to us, in the way has always been done in the villages. Things are repaired and reused again and again, just because it's the most logical. And we also recycled materials that were generated by the construction itself. Pallets for the handles and furniture, Galician pine wood left over for tables, shelves, handrails. Or, for example, the broken pieces, you can see here, of thermoclay. Some of them were broken when arrived to the work by transport or by defective manufacture. Those pieces at first were returned, but later we decided to separate and save them for use in the final part of the house. We put them turned 90 degrees, so the broken parts were not visible. The result was a different texture, which also helped us to differentiate the final surface of the mezzanines from the rooms. This is the view of one of the almost finished mezzanines, I think we managed to turn something that seemed like a problem, something positive. And these kind of situations are the most interesting for us. The fact of having a lot of time to do the house could be an advantage, but the most important thing was the attitude I could have. When from April asked me about references for this house, I could mention Levrenz, Brodsky, or even Jujol with Beaufort House, or autoreferences with Catalan architects, which I have shared experiences and exhibitions like Sensitive Matter or Architectural Rovers. But if I have to talk about a reference, I should talk about this. From Alvar Aalto house in Muratzalo, I like almost everything, but even more than the result, what really interests me about that work is the attitude. Alvar Aalto seems that said about the experimental house, or the summer house, that we must combine laboratory work with a play mentality and vice versa. That attitude, maybe, was the most clear influence I had, and it's the one that I try to keep with me during the whole process. That's all. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, David. That was an excellent and inspiring presentation. I would like to thank everybody here who made it possible in these post-COVID times that I'm here in person. And I'm so impressed to see so many real analog human beings, all architects, all close together. And I really look forward to the discussion later already. So I'm going to, I'm going to talk about brick. I've used the title Rethinking Brick. Even though the images may look very vernacular, but there's a lot of rethinking in those images. And I just want to put it there as a title. And I'm going to, unlike the previous presentation, going deep into a project, I would like to talk about my own journey in discovering brick, and show different projects on the way. But I'm doing it also because I come from a very different context. And I would like you to know how in India I encountered brick, which I want to start by saying that brick is the first manufactured material. It has been begun 3,800 years ago. And when humans discovered that if you use fire, when they discovered fire and they discovered that earth can change its properties when fired, and then they first started doing cooking pots and terracotta, actually it was called. It's not so different from brick, actually. So, and yet brick has survived all kinds of social, technological transitions of humanity, and right up until now with, robotically laid bricks, bricks continue to be relevant. So it has survived each and every transition somehow, and I was always intrigued by brick. But anyway, I will start by explaining that, in the context of India, mostly, even though we have the biggest mega cities of huge amounts of population, but still by and large, India is still not mainstream industrialized. So when we talk about brick, we are not talking about the kind of bricks you see, by and large. We have those also. We have in India very small pockets of high tech coexisting with very ancient ways of doing things. And I just want to sort of talk about it from a very zoomed out perspective, first of all. So in agricultural land, see, the thing is, humans have usually built with clay, wherever the clay was available, so all over the world. And so either the clay was good, either the earth, I should not say clay, either earth was possible to use directly. If it was a certain texture, then it was used as rammed earth, or it was used as, wattle and daub, or all kinds of techniques. And where usually the earth was more clayey, it was better suited to being cooked as bricks. So people who, in our context, people who do agriculture are also naturally close to that kind of clay with which you can make bricks. So all over Africa, India, and all over, you'll find small producers of bricks. So what is interesting is like as a child, when you travel through the landscape, you see brick making, as a normal thing happening in the background. And the bricks that get made are actually not like the factory bricks, where you have to build huge ovens and Hoffman kilns and all kind of, like coal, etc., going into it. But what the ancient way of making bricks, which is still being made in most of the world, that is pre-industrialized still in our time, what happens is that the bricks are stacked as a pile, and the stack is the oven. So when they finish cooking the bricks are sold, and that's the whole oven is gone. So this is how humans made bricks. The genius part of the bricks, or why it was a manufactured material, was because it was modularized. And even though the brick is rectangular, you could make curved things with it, unlike Lego, by the way, because the mortar allows you to do arches and do all kinds of things. But what is interesting, how does it affect, for me it was important to see how do bricks affect the socio-economic and environmental impact in today's time. Because most people dismiss bricks as a very high energy material because it requires so much coal. And I realized in my journey, 3 decades as an architect, coming from Bombay, from conventional, schooling and going and discovering things by thinking more deeply about them, I realized that you cannot just say that brick, in all our green rating systems, they say how many kilojoules. It's not like that. There is a thing, not only quantitative energy, there is a qualitative energy. Am I cooking it with coconut shells or with coal? It makes a huge difference to what industries have to go into taking the coal out and so on. So I went into deeper questions in this journey, but I want to explain that where I came from was that brick, even though we have built the biggest complex cathedrals and all kinds of large spans and very tall buildings with brick, by and large all over the world, not the natural laws, but the human laws have prevented us today to do more genius buildings with brick, because we have made bylaws such that we can only use bricks as infilling material inside concrete. We've made in every country, I don't want to deviate over there, but I was quite intrigued that a brick is not even allowed to take weight almost in many places, And even in Australia, they call it veneer, brick veneer, as if it's just for show, So having looked at the area, and I realized in our times that to understand the complexity of materiality in the age of climate change, we have to look at the material not from the time we get it from a manufacturer's catalog, but from the way the material is already manufactured. Already there are questions embedded. So here I noticed in our context, these are regular industrial brick sizes, but they're not industrially made. These are handmade bricks. And I started realizing the way the making of a material like brick is embedded in the territorial questions of the place. For example, these thinnings that come out of reforested trees that are grown for the purpose, these things are grown for scaffolding, because these woods are almost casuarina. It's a very straight tree, and it's very useful for using as a scaffolding. And the thinnings of those that the people planted are used for firing the ovens. And these are the typical brick stacks, which are then plastered and closed, and then these things go into firing them. And after they are fired, the bricks which are on the outside are a bit cooler, so they are less baked. So either they are rebaked in the next round of firing. So there is no oven. This is the oven. And whatever is external, you might use it in interior areas where you don't need such a total brick strength, or it doesn't have to be that waterproof and so on. So the fact that the material is not standard, and the humans who were also doing custom-made solutions to housing allowed those type of imperfections which we appreciate now, that Daniel also showed, in his work. Sorry, David just showed in his work, that the human discretion, if it is not left out of the equation just because of over-standardization, then we have so much to gain. So here you see a society where they are able to produce small amounts of bricks only according to how much clay collected there after the monsoon. Otherwise, they are probably rice farmers, or they grow this kind of material. And they also do lime mortar. They make lime. There are lime kilns, and so on. And so when I came to this South India, Auroville, and there was a whole city to be built there, I wanted to see to what extent, with new eyes, I could rethink the brick. So Wall House, the project that a lot of you probably know, was my first application of bricks. But here you will notice that these bricks are only 2.5 centimeters high, because in my search to the process of the way bricks are made, I realized that if it is all being done in a handmade fashion, then it's good to stick to the handmade size that they also made. The other sizes were made for the convenience of the machine and for various other factors, and introduced in the local landscape. So I took the old South Indian bricks that are still being made in very small pockets, and those bricks are very easy to work. They are not heavy because they're so thin. It's really like a craft work, that because you're not exhausted lifting a brick. So the brick and the mortar are almost equally thick, actually. And the brick is weak compared to the factory brick. And I realized that I also didn't see it, like we have just spoken in the previous examples. I haven't seen it without mortar, and I mean without plaster. I exposed it for us to start seeing it more clearly, that these bricks also exist. Because normally the imperfections exist because it's done in a very local way. And I realized that those imperfections, when Louis Kahn came and built those fabulous brick buildings in India, he was using wire-cut industrial bricks. And so we all started disliking our own bricks, because of the imperfection. I realized that these bricks are weaker, it's true. But then it is because the clay is not the optimum clay. The fuel is not the optimum fuel, but it's done in the most affordable way, and it's still a brick, and it's waterproof, water resistant. And so if you use slightly thicker walls, which you anyway has many positives to slightly, instead of a 23 centimeter wall, I'm using a 30 centimeter wall. It's not so much thick either. So I started producing, I decided to come up with simple bonding, like we call this Flemish bond actually. I have to mention it here at least, because we were taught the English bond and the Flemish bond. And because the brick is not 1:2, the traditional brick, because they have to build thicker than 2 bricks, because they are so small, I created bonding patterns that are not exactly drawn out, but there is a logic, and then it can be just done by the craftspeople. And so this is how the house, was developed as a basic, the materiality of that house. But I'm just showing you an image of myself from 30 years ago when I was doing this. Okay, it was just straight out of school. I started my practice with 23, actually. I think a lot of things, you are very naive, and it's good. You don't fear so much, Later, as you grow up, you put too many questions and don't want to take risks, I suppose. But what was interesting for me is to realize that there is no boundary needed between brick and the use of terracotta, either in the floor finishes or in the construction of roofing tiles and so on. And I started discovering that because whenever a material exists, like clay, there is the skill. It looked to us like there's no labor, there's unskilled labor, we were calling it, because you thought, oh, there's nothing in this place. I came from Bombay as there was nothing. And then I now know that that there's always something, that in the foreground there is clay, in the background is the skill of some people making pots out of it. So I started working with that material in a holistic way, not separating the brick from the masonry of the wall from the ceiling and so on. And eventually landed up using cones that we made with coconut shell fired in the open, just the way they do it, make stacks next to the rice fields, that the people are not necessarily working in factories, but just producing the material. It's all temporary, but the house is permanent, but the processes don't leave their imprint. And I started, using this kind of highly insulating materials for the ceiling through catenary curves. That's why I don't know anymore what is vernacular and what is, what is high tech. People would call it low tech, but you need to know lots more calculations somehow to do these type of things, which we usually do empirically. So the advantage of this kind of systems is that you don't even need, the traditional roofing tiles need a lot of wood substructure, and we don't have wood anymore. So this was a way forward to intelligently use these materials, and I needed a lot of support from the craftsmen. Much more, I was supported by them than the engineers, because the engineers were telling me all the things we shouldn't be doing, and the craftsmen were just eager to try out. And I had a sense of confidence because they are used to handling material. So with their help, I was able to produce this same wall house. But I started thinking, and I did so many more experiments on the side that I won't have the time to tell you, but I made all kinds of things with the terracotta once I started, and I had a sense of community with the craftsmen, and we got ideas, and these are for making this kind of jack arch kind of systems, also in masonry for flatter roofs, because those roof bolts will not allow me to use the ceiling, even though it's efficient. So I need a way to make flat roofs. So at the same time, to not need always spotters, so that any person who's looking for work can do this, we had to design extruders where the clay would just come out of a slightly trapezoidal form, and then you would just cut it, anyone could produce it. The idea was to build so anyone can build almost. Because instead of looking at the poverty in the place, I was trying to look at the abundance. What do we have a lot of, and how can I use that? Then suddenly, instead of feeling poor, you feel rich. So it was very simple. So what do you have a lot of? There's clay. What do you have a lot of? A lot of potters. You have these people, sometimes you together upgrade knowledges, and you figure out how to go forward. And as I went along, I actually found a way to use the original pot that got me thinking. This is the rice cooking pot. It's our version of paella. It's called pongal, that they make in this kind of clay pots. And nowadays, there are entire communities who know how to make that, but nobody buys them, and they keep trying to sell them. So urbanization is threatening the livelihood of craftsmen, and I was thinking how to give them a permanent assurance to their livelihood if we make products that we can absorb in construction. So then I started developing other ceilings. For example, I used these kind of pots to create lost formwork, to be able to reduce the steel, like 2 steel bars could be removed out of 3, because of the fact that it is used as an efficient waffle slab principle. So I started using terracotta for all kinds of things, including formwork. And this is, of course, in this wall house again. The wall house became my laboratory, and I tested here all the things for larger projects where I had bigger spans to solve, like a 14-meter span multi-purpose hall had to be made, and I didn't want to have those beams. So I tested this in the wall house, and me and the craftsmen could test. But then I also I did about 6 types of roofing systems in that house. I had to really watch out that it doesn't become like a cacophony, because it was my laboratory, and then it should also look like a house, But I wanted to test things where, without the pressure to have to prove to others, etc. So here, for example, these are for intermediate floors, flat vaults made out of the same brick, because here I don't need insulation. So the same material of the wall is the material of the floor. So in a way, this house is still, for me, it's a very contemporary space. I'm not a very nostalgic person. My sense of space is very contemporary. But I don't feel that contemporariness has to be delinked from the material and the making of the spot where we are. Because I do think architecture has to be grounded in place, or we don't feel very well. So I basically, I'm going to run you through just some images how that house actually looks with, after all, the terracotta quality spreads, into, all over. I was very appreciative of the previous presentation because I find a lot of similarities, so well curated, I feel, that it's a very, very different context, but there is a kind of patchwork of the same material according to the inherent logic of not trying to waste any material and still create space and define the different elements and leaving different imprint somehow. This is actually my house when I live in India. This is where I am. So, so here you see that even the rest of the bathrooms and the floor finishes, I try to not. Once you start doing something, you realize that you don't need to import materials from far away. You can get really addicted to that idea, and you start managing to do almost anything. Like I took natural stone instead of ceramic tiles, and I just found it such a luxury to be able to build, just like you can cook with whatever you have in a place, and it depends on the recipe. It doesn't depend on the ingredient, how a thing is manufactured. And I think architecture is the same. But you see there's a rammed earth wall also in the background, because I was testing that also for another project. So, I was comparing all these things. So the house is a result of all of this. But then some of those results have been applied in other projects. Like here is a brick ceiling. It was more profitable in a low-cost housing project to apply only the ceiling. Or here, this is another very, very modest kind of housing, which was also produced in this technique. And it was very interesting for me to realize that all this very deep and rigorous research done in materials turned out to be, even though my house and the other previous experiments in brick looked like much more of high budget, people weren't believing the low budget because they found the space looking luxurious. But then they saw that in other projects and bus sheds and everywhere people were using these techniques. And so it's very interesting to see, this is another, it's a skills campus for teenage children to develop their skills. So there you needed some kind of large span. And then these are other projects I did later. This is a co-housing project where not every element has been used. Somewhere there's a roof and somewhere there's one of the different things used. But then they started, it started having a kind of widespread application, all the different things I did in brick, and knowing how to negotiate handmade with machine made, how to get in, not to think that a brick is a brick, but there's so much to think in it. Once you decide that it's brick, there is still so many questions and so many different impacts that project can have. So in some of the other cities, like in Pune, I have used also those wire-cut industrial bricks. In these cases, I've also left them exposed. I'm just going to run through a range of architecture without too many comments, I feel. Because in my case, I want to draw the attention to our context, and then you see how other people built there. And like one of the reasons to take off the plaster and to have very large roof overhangs is so that the brick can remain exposed and we can save a lot of resources. So you can see this is Pondicherry, and this is a library which has braille books, very, very modest building. In fact, we have not completed this facade because the owner passed away, and now this is not finished. There are some kind of screens that were placed here. But yeah, so to make that building stand out as an institutional building, but very simple budget building, where there is a lot of, it's just very simple and basic. And the other people's buildings are also made in brick. but they are more untidily made. And now the culture to plaster in India is led to the fact that you can work anyhow because it won't be seen. Because it's a makeup culture now, everything is hidden. The pipes are hidden, the conduits are hidden, everything is hidden, everything is complicated to repair, and it allows us, we can afford to be untidy, which I think is a very big loss, because we actually knew how to be neat. Now, so that there is a lot of unlearning, even to get this simplicity out. There's a lot of, rethinking involved for all the craftsmen as well. And then there is one project, which is a daycare center, in which I've used terracotta screens, because we didn't have the budget to really do, it's a very low budget daycare for homes for homeless. It's like associated to, people children who come from very difficult homes with very socially challenged stories. And then I wanted this place to be very solid for them, so that they feel like it's safe and all that. But the budget was quite small. So I did all the walls porous, so that there is just large overhangs and, just a breathable kind of facade. That we don't have to have too many doors, windows, which are always expensive. And yet children have a sense of, with these little angles that instead of parallel walls, there is a sense of enclosure for them, and it gives a sense of territorial identity. So there's some small details like that. But in this case, what I did is I chose to use a reinforced cement concrete, stable, strong, solid structure, and make the wall light and porous, because I think they need to have a certain identity of security as well. And now I will show you my last project, which I call Baked Building with Fire. It's about baked in situ earth construction. So it's a kind of brick building which is made in situ. That means a mud house is built with mud bricks, and then it's cooked. Not in a factory, but it's cooked like a big pot. If you would put in a big oven, except we don't have an oven. It's just like those people had made their bricks also with ovenless cooking by just insulating the structure. So this was the topic of my PhD, and that's why I have to give the title Rethinking Brick, because again, when you see this architecture, it will look very vernacular, but it's nothing to do with any past knowledge. It just shows us that the future requires, past knowledge is not going to suffice for us to navigate the future, but often we think that even products like brick or concrete, we think, it's so set, there's nothing more to be discovered in it. There's so much more to be discovered. We know nothing compared to what we can still know, is the message I want to give. So I did my PhD on this, but I had also built a few techniques, a few houses, 3 projects in this technique. It is about Ray Meeker, a Californian ceramist. He did some experiments over 20 years, and based on that, I did a few projects as well, because I was very intrigued, not only because it is so adventurous to even attempt to do something like this, but because the idea of taking the fire to the building site, as opposed to taking all these products to the fire and making everybody go to an industry. And I wanted to know what exactly is the impact on a spot if you build this way or that, in a place where brick makers have the knowledge actually it's like if we all don't have to go and cook out, eat somewhere else, but we bring the fire into each and every person's kitchen. What can happen? Everybody can cook. Or they learn to cook. So I wanted to follow this through my PhD. But basically, I'm going to show you a few images just so that you understand what this means. Ray Meeker had basically been concerned that in typical brick making, about 40% of the heat you generate, you need about 980 degrees Celsius to make a brick. So about 980 degrees which you generate, are about 40% are lost in the oven wall. Each time you fire, the cold wall will take all that heat. So you have to put in much more heat. So that is a kind of wastage he wanted to tap. So what he thought was, that if you could build a brick house and fill it with brick that you have to cook or other ceramic products, so you use the house as a temporary oven, then you cook your real bricks, and then you come up with some genius insulation or something that you can get that house, the heat which you would have lost into a kiln wall, you get for free to cook your house. And then you get a ceramic house for the price of a mud house. And we have monsoon in India, it's very heavy. So, but inspired by, you will see in this image, that inspired by the brick stacks of the way, the ancient way how Mohenjo-daro, Harappa had civilization had made bricks, it's the same way. So he kind of combined to make that a user-friendly technique, and I had been following his work beside my own profession, and I was very fascinated that it would be suddenly, the house would then be not a consumer of building materials, but a producer of even more local building materials and create local economy. So I was very impressed with that prospect. And I was also interested that what would the brickwork look like? It would not look like the pixelated light and dark. No brick can be equal, because it will lie in different spots in the oven. And then in Peterson in Denmark, I went to their factory. They have to artificially sort that it doesn't come random. So they have to have another mixer that those are artificially sorted in our standardized way of building. But in this, what happens is like brush strokes where the heat travels, you see this kind of thing. Somewhere it's light, somewhere it's dark, the fire will have its own path. And long story short, I did all this analysis. I just want to tell you it exists online in my PhD. But basically, we have compared all kinds of kiln systems and all kinds of, Rainmaker did different kinds of architecture based on different type of kilns to see which type of kiln would lead to the most efficient house and where can the brick take half the energy to produce. Apart from the fact that we are tapping it, and apart from the fact that the brick house is going to allow us to make the roof also with brick, not necessarily concrete, and the bricks also don't need cement. So the savings were so many that I first did a project called Spirit Sense, where I experimented all this. It was in 1999, long ago. And eventually, sorry, I'm going to skip this. I have forgot to remove these slides. But basically, in terms of a holistic, sustainable solution, in the context where brick making looks like this, if it is allowed to not be in a factory, it is just on the field. When they make bricks, it looks like a activity. When it's done, and it's a field. That's how it is. Anyway, I have forgot to take out this animation thing. So basically, then I'm going to show you that last project, that is the homes for homeless children I did in 2008, which was about having small little clusters and foster parents looking after one parent per 4 children. And I realized after all my PhD and all the research and looking at all the ways bricks are made in the high-tech and low-tech parts of the world, that if I want to make this a real viable option in terms of competing from the energy side, then I should make the brick very thin. Because if it is like an eggshell, very thin, if there is no volt and then fat walls with buttresses, instead if it's very thin, it'll be easier to cook it through. And the reason we managed to cook it through easily was because Rainmaker invented a combustible insulation that he was only getting up to 650 or something into the wall, and he needs 900. So he put up kind of a mix which has a little bit of straw and things which burn. So in the last part, when it's 650, that outer insulation just catches fire, and in the last minute you get another burst of fire. And it's a lot of years of experimentation, what I'm telling you, very exhausting work. But then I designed the whole housing to not have a division between a vault and a wall. So in the beginning I started with that, and I'm telling you in the end, I realized that space, like the womb, actually, it is actually like the egg it is also a home of someone, you know, and there was a very deep discovery of that, and I realized that that is the cheapest thing to fire. So I'm just going to quickly show you. We built mud. So what you do, you build mud bricks, you make your bricks, then you make your mud mortar. In my case, I used whatever I could. There was no money for this project. So I used any kind of junk things to make formwork, and I adjusted the holes around that. So I used fired brick only in places where I need a little bit stability. When the fire comes, you know, like when you put a bread in an oven, you see that it becomes wobbly for some minutes before it becomes hard. The same thing is going to happen to the entire house. So you don't want the stack inside to collapse. So the edges, we have used these kind of bricks. So you have your dome. And then, you know, I made some kind of formwork, like you see a rotating pivot. Everything has to be designed in our place, you know. It's like you want a dress, you have to go to a shop, choose the cloth. You have to do everything. So these are all the result of that kind of life. So, and then you have to make little fire boxes to start the fire. So in the difference between this project and the others is that we found a way not to burn with wood, but we took the coal dust from the factories. It's a waste product, you know, the dust from factories where coal still has some, it's a powder that is left on the grounds. You sweep it, it still has calorific value. And we mixed 5% of that into the brick, and we tested that it will be, if you put all your bricks tightly, that coal will burn and it will stop exactly when the brick is cooked, and it will go to the next layer, the heat. This is a different type of firing we did here. And we needed boxes like this only to start the fire, just to give it a start. And in the bottom, it's like a grill. We had to design that air can come from below. So you see all these complicated shapes. And in one layer, we had like a coal put to start it, but all the rest are just normal, just spreading the heat. And then the insulation I talked about, which will be taken down later. And then the house cooks for 3 or 4 days. And it looks very amazing. I mean, you know, just like you're waiting outside your oven when to check how it is, it's like that. And that you can't do anything. If you made a mistake, you have to do it in the next house. You have to just wait. You can't do anything. It's already out of your hands. And then then the house is cooked. Then we'll have to waterproof it. But then all the bricks inside can be harvested. And you can make all your own sizes. You can do whatever you want. You can also make wash basins, tiles, pipes. All the ceramic things we use can all be made here. You can make bricks of any shape you want. So, you know, the brick has to withstand as a mud structure. Then it has to withstand the baking moment where things will cracks, like in the bread. Cracks are going to come, and when it cools, they will all fill in. All those things will happen. And then, you know, you will finally get a baked house. And so there's a whole industry you can do out of it, like I said. So we finished the remaining part of the project also, like with broken glasses, and we used a lot of urban waste to finish the house, but also to waterproof these areas with broken tiles. And that's what it is now. And I'll just show you a few images without explaining much, like because we're talking about brick and earlier we talked about Venice. I actually, when I was called to Venice, to the first time I had participated in Chipperfield's Biennale, I just want to end with a few images from there, that I saw exactly this kind of patchwork city. For me, Venice is a brick city, and everywhere you see that when the plaster has peeled off, then you see the different layers of history from which part brick was taken, where brick architecture was always made like that economically as a patchwork. So I thought that it would be amazing to bring, because it was called Common Ground, so I thought it's best to go inside that Arsenale space where you could see the brickwork only because the plaster was down, and so you could see the construction. I thought it would be very nice to install an architecture which is this is an architecture in ruin, which shows, it reveals the construction, and mine would be an unfinished architecture, which will also reveal the construction and show that there is a common ground between how we made architecture all over the planet, but also across past generations and future, that everything is in a general continuum, and you see the volt, the catenary form, there it is coincidentally, serendipity, exactly the same shape and form and size of my own volt. So I got the idea, and above here is a Mangalore tile, I mean like the terracotta tiles too. So I thought it would be quite nice to install here that the common ground is actually gravity and the natural laws, you know. It's the same whether you're in Italy or in India. If a volt stands here, it will stand there. And also the humans are also the same. We didn't change biologically so much. So here I had the occasion, so I made the foundation with the contemporary bricks because we are on the Venice ground. And the Venetians cannot now use those bricks anymore, but my bricks look more like Venetian bricks when I brought them. These were all to show the common ground, and we produced all of this in full scale, a whole house in 6 weeks with our students, including the roof, but I also did some new touches there. I wanted to test with glass bottles. With Venice, we got our wine bottles. We didn't drink all of that. But anyway, this is the final house, common ground. You see the roof and the roof above, the wall and the pillar next to it, the same language. One is from rural Tamil Nadu, that it would look not suitable in Italy. But, you know, so yeah, just juxtaposing those two things. And 3 more images from my recent exhibition in Louisiana called Taking Time. And the attention was not to delay and to take time for that, in that meaning, but the idea is that think about the architecture not only from the space point of view, about from the time also, in terms of which time in which we are building, and to not see things in isolation, but to zoom out and see the big picture. And to take the time means not to dismiss something today because we say time is money, time is money. Time is all we have. Time is our life, and if we take it, we will be more fulfilled. And taking time means to just take things in our own hands. And taking time mostly means to take the time to think. Thank you.
Good evening. Oh, good evening. My name is Lieve Nijs. I am an architect at Blaf Architecten. And I have the impossible task this evening to discuss what we just saw. First of all, David and Anupama, thank you so much for your inspiring presentations. We have Tom Verschuren here from DMVA Architects, Belgian practice. So to involve you in the discussion right away, Tom, we saw a lot of experimentation, a lot of making involved in the presentation, which for me implies the question about the role of the architect and the connection of the architect with the making of the architecture. I think this is one of the aspects that also Belgian architecture is quite renowned for. This high level of experimentation and this high level of connection with the making. How would you react to what you just saw? How would you explain, how would you feel that these two very particular practices can be, what can we learn from them within our context, knowing that, of course, Spain and India are two totally different climate systems, etc.
First of all, nice presentations. I feel me so humble because the way you're experimenting with with big bricks, and I think I'm born in the wrong country. No, I'm be honest. In Belgium, we have a different climate. I think most of our buildings in brickwork are erected as cavity walls. That means that we have an exterior shell in bricks, then we have a small cavity, insulation, and the load-bearing walls. And when I was looking to your presentations, then I had the impression that maybe you are more free than we are, but nevertheless, the way you are handling this, the way you are experimenting with the material, sometimes maybe we are losing that aspect. For us, it's kind of, we are used to be in the way that we built up a cavity wall, that we built up a new construction, that we very often maybe forget the basics of bricks. And that's what I learned tonight. And I'm really impressed about that. Nevertheless, our office and also Lieven his office and a lot of good Belgian practices, we have really bricks in our DNA, and we also try to be creative on our way. It's completely different. As Lieven told us, our climate is so different, and regarding the building regulations, regarding the energy regulations, sometimes we have the impression that we have to build between two lines. But nevertheless, there's a lot of potential here in Belgium, a lot of good practices. We try to do the same as you do, but I think in a different way. For me, limits, it's for me not something negative, on contrary. And I think our creativity is more on the domain of the application of bricks. As Lieven wrote in his essay in the latest A+, about the contradiction about the outer shell we have, the facade, the load-bearing component, very often in bricks, in hollow bricks, that nowadays we see a kind of evolution that because of the issue of sustainability, that more and more facades disappear and will be replaced by other materials. And that's for me a little bit a pity, because I still like to do something with bricks. I think Belgium is a brick country. I think if we are talking about well-being, about authenticity, I think we have to keep the bricks in mind.
Anupama, maybe as a reaction on what Tom says, you operate from Berlin right now, so these you are working now within an as you call it, an overstandardization, an overstandardized an environment, so to say. How do you practice the same level of experimentation, or let's say co-creation, cooperation, participation with local people, with craftsmen? How do you participate this within the environment of, let's say, a standardized Western European country?
I think I actually have not, I can't give a direct answer because I haven't done architecture practice experiences in the European context. I'm in Berlin since 3 years, and I have been mostly, my interaction with the developed countries has been mostly through my role as a professor. And I have done a lot of laboratory type research work, not only in brick, in ferrocement and all kinds of other, in cements I've done a lot of work, and clay. But I see some big problematics in the Western world, if I may openly, critically. Yeah, it's okay? I'm the minority here, so please bear with me. I don't claim to be right, but I see, because when I come from the developed countries, there is a sense of, there is a kind of colonialization which continues to look up to the developed countries, and all the norms and things that are done in one place are very too easily almost, without, thankfully in India there is some inertia, but otherwise they just get without resistance applied all over the world. So my problem is that I think that standardization has a lot of advantages. We see that in the times of the post-Bauhaus, what are the advantages of that. But similarly, I think machine-made things can have got a lot of advantages, but the handmade and the machine-made can equally become oppressive. The problem is that the problem of the standardized world is that it's not a problem if the robots are robotic, but if the humans become robotic, it is a big problem. This is a big problem for me. I go everywhere and I see common problems that cannot be fixed because they say the system won't let me. For example, I spent 1 extra hour today on the flight because there was a small error made by the people who booked my ticket, and they put the 2 last names, the Spanish names, that kind of, no, they just, instead of putting the name this way, that way, they did the other way. And now the person was told immediately, I had this problem many times, different types of problems. So I come from the developed country, so I'm very anxious when I go in a developed country culture, people won't think. So if there's a signal of green, somebody may, if I make a mistake, they'll go over me. Because they will see the light, but they won't see me. I'm always worried. You know, there is a numbness to the humans, and there is a kind of a blind surrender to the machines, that the tools made by the humans, they are taken more important than the human who made the tool. And this, for me, is so dangerous. So, for example, this ticket, after pointing out the mistake, for a month they are trying to solve it, and they couldn't. And then they couldn't there, and they couldn't there, and they say, oh, it won't let me, it won't let me. So why are you going on designing things where it serves you for, say, 90% even? I don't think it's 90, but okay, let's assume 90% of the time it serves. But we are all humans. There is going to be individual decision to be made, and there is no space for it. And we are all oppressed, and we are suffering, and we are not liking what we build, and it is expensive, and it's polluting, and I can go on. And this is all stupid. And I want to say that, why don't we be clever? We humans deserve better. Like, you know, let's be standard, but let's have some chance. Come on. You know? And most of all, please, all the architects, thank you for your appreciation. Instead of, because I don't mean to criticize, I'm not a bitter, critical person. I'm just saying, I'm so excited about the human potential, and I'm sorry to put it in this critical way, but I feel that architecture, at least architecture, should be like that, because we are a custom-made product, you know. We are like hairdressers and all. There is some amount of standardization you can do, but architecture is going to adjust on a site. We are not going to have the same matchbox everywhere. We are having it, but still we have to do unique things. So why are we cutting our own wings? I don't get it. I don't get it.
So that's a beautiful plea for, let's say, design in general, and also for the aspect of resistance being inherent to the act of design. And maybe if standardization is keeping us from thinking or tailor-made solutions or acting. David, in your work as well, you've shown this very textile, a very particular and beautiful house in 3 Springtimes. But you've also shown some public projects. As a reaction maybe on Anupama's statement, what is your attitude coming from this environment where you are so close to the making and where you have this very specific role as an architect? How do you take this attitude to more public projects, to bigger projects where you have different types of commissioners, where you have different standards, where you have different rules, etc.? How do you deal with that?
It's not always possible to do this. No, it's very different to work in a little project on your own, or no, that in a public building, which much more people and much more conditions. But the attitude, it's the same. If you have this attitude, you can look for the moment you can use it, and you never know when this moment can appear. No, but if you are enough open, I think you can have some changes during the process. For example, no, I have shown 2 examples, and that was not. The prevision of the final result was not that big, no. But there are some things happens during the work, some situations that makes the chance to you to make something, to introduce something else, no.
And how does your connection with the material, with brick, how does it help you in that attitude? Because you called in your presentation, you called Brickwork an open system. I think that sounded very interesting to me.
Sorry?
As working with Brickwork,
yes,
you get in touch with the resistance of the material, like the proportion or the imperfections or the corner solutions or different types of joints to be made. So it helps you as a designer to develop different ways to approach a specific question. Is there something analog between the way Brickwork learns us how to solve questions as we proceed, so to say, in this kind of open system situation, and let's say your position as an architect towards stakeholders in a project in a way? Maybe I'm overshooting it, but I'm just curious.
But I don't think so. I don't know if I understand the question, because the relation between open system and the...
How would you say that if you consider brick an open system?
Yes.
Would it be fair to say that working with brick has taught you as an architect how to learn that architecture in itself maybe is also an open system? And what we referred to just now is that this standardization is all about closing the system. So this openness or this open system and is kind of an important asset for design, I would say.
Yes, well, I think that when I talk about open system, I'm talking about the process, no? I'm talking about not thinking in the final result of what I'm going to do with this material, but in making think the project with some rules that I want to follow. Then, no? It's like a play, no? a place has this characteristic, no? It's something that have some rules, but each time is different, no? So when I talk about open system, I talk about this, the way I project and the way then I built, no? And the way during the process that it's large and it's long, things can change, things could happen, and no, the initial ideas maybe are very clear, there are very clear rules, but then the result is not controlled, no?
I think in what these presentations share, Tom, maybe another question for you is this idea of improvising, experimenting, not knowing what the outcome will be, and spending a lot of time trying and retrying and remaking. Do you think it still has a space in practice as we know it in Belgium? Is this something you experience daily?
I think there's absolutely a place for experimenting, but I see a difference between smaller projects, private clients, as most of the projects you showed. It's easier to experiment with that kind of projects. Very often clients come to you because they know what you are standing for. And in that context, I think maybe we have to do that more. Regarding comparing to more public buildings, it's complexer, more difficult. Nevertheless, our Nona project we did in Mechelen, we got the opportunity, we created the opportunity to finish the inner courtyards with brickworks as a kind of, together with an artist, Nick Irving, Bricks in Motions. And that was nice to do, also because of the reason of participation. Because what did we do? We to try to organize a tender, public tender, but in different lots. So we took out that part of the tender, and for that reason we tried to make an artwork under the definition artwork that you can make something special, something experimental based on participation. But even in that case, we as architect has a prominent role in that, because if you don't want to be the catalyst of the project, you won't have that kind of piece of brickwork, that kind of artwork into the project. But again, comparing smaller project to larger projects, there's a lot of difference to me. And sometimes I'm wondering that don't you have to find also a possibility to create, to implement experimentation into also the larger and public projects. It's difficult to do that, but maybe in the project definition, maybe you have to think about that, especially municipalities or the Flemish builder, that we can master build, that we can do something like that, because I think imagination, experimentation, it's so important for us as architects and also for the later users and the passers-by, so maybe we have to think about that.
May I say something here where you asked how I see now that I complained about the things I complain about here in this context, I want to say something about the great opportunity I see. And I think is that where I feel you are ahead of us, because you did certain mistakes, I would say. I mean, while developing technologies that allow larger economies, explore, certain conveniences, we have created some habits which may not serve us right now necessarily, but we have the great opportunity through the fact that we have reached this climate concerns now, and we know that our current ways of building are problematic in so many aspects. So I think here we have the resources and we have the genuine problem and targets that we have to all commit to build differently. So if some habits we made that speed up, if it serves us, it's not a problem. But there are many areas where it's actually not working. You know, the building habits are consuming so much resources, and so we haven't, anyway, we are being forced by that global situation to create that ground for experiments, hopefully. And I think the future, which between the two contexts where there is a divide, I think the future will be actually in the big scale, because the population has grown up very fast. We are like still growing, so we have to conserve agricultural land, and we have to make our cities dense and tall. So we all don't know the answer, but we will have to find that answer in the future. Not only we have to build higher and taller, but with less resources. So this will lead to experiments, I hope.
That can be, but nevertheless, for me, very often is a problem goes out about money. And we have the raising raw material costs, we have the raising labor costs, and I only see a potential in experimentation if you try to make a kind of basis of participation, that you can have volunteers. Otherwise, I don't see a future for experimentation, because we are living in Western Europe here, and all goes about money. So for that reason, participation, find people, volunteers, and then I see a future for that. And again, for me, the architect is always the catalyst, is always the person who has to guide the process.
Yeah.
I would say that experimentation is never like an irresponsible act. On the contrary, it shows engagement, it shows involvement. So just maybe to close this discussion, you say, let's rethink brick. You're not saying, let's question brick. So do you think this is a material that it has, as you said, it has always existed since there was earth and fire? People have baked clay. So what is, let's say, the biggest future challenge for you in terms of this very specific material? We talked about, you have mentioned all the aspects. You've talked about economics, you've talked about measurement systems, you've talked about stacking, you've talked about resistance, you've talked about the backsides of architecture, you've talked about almost every possible aspect that is inherent to this very simple building material. But still, we agree that there are some major challenges in the future. What could be, how do you see this material in the future?
When I did my PhD, I discovered that there are some qualities of brick which will make it a future material still relevant. You know, if we go for sustainable solutions, which we will have to go for, with our laws will make us go for it, but because its durability, look, 3,800 years, and the first bricks are still bricks. They have nothing happened to them. They still are durable.
Even with contemporary production?
I think bricks have got that property of being that durable, but not in the way metal or cement is, which cement, will go after a while different. But the durability of earth is not a burden of brick is not a burden on the earth. So then it's other long-lasting insulation, so many properties, and most of all, it's modularity. So how can you beat that? And especially if people have to, when housing gets affordable, there'll be new methods, the economics will change, because people can't afford housing. If you look at other changes happening in that sector, like sweat equity is going to become an important way to be able to finance housing. And then you will have to find things which everyone can do, not only what specialists can do. So I think bricks will, let's see after some years.
But you've mentioned scale as a challenge.
I really think that scale is made by us. We have made an environment where we have let our built environment slip out of the human scale. Mm-hmm. And because we cannot afford the machine scale, like the small cafe in Spain is much cheaper than the Starbucks, right? Everywhere. Starbucks, even if it would be the same price, 50% of the money goes to manage it. Same with the building. So when we are going to have to we can't afford any more already in the rich countries also, housing. So we will all eat humble pie and we will start working and it will all come down to a scale. There's COVID, there's this and that. It will all scale down back to human, I think. There will be some large things, airports, there will be, but it doesn't mean that just because we are doing a bridge in concrete, every park bench has to be in concrete. Housing is human scale, I think.
David, for you, some challenges that you want to take on in the future concerning brick?
Well, I don't know. I'm sure that there are going to be challenges, because, well, it's a material that we have from 11,000 years ago, and every time that we return to the brick, we try to do something new, I suppose. It's something inherent in the practice, which are going to be the next steps of this. I don't really know, but I think that now it's very logical to think about work with materials directly from the place, directly from nature, in a circular way of thinking. So I like very much the last project of Anupama, and the possibility of fabric, with the material inside, with bricks from the place, and the interaction between the building and the place. I think it's time more important for people and even also for architects. So I think the experimentation maybe goes in this way.
Tom, would you like to add something to that?
They've both spoken about the material, and I would go for the craftsmanship. I'm missing craftsmanship, actually, and also the proudness. And maybe we have to make the material more sexy regarding education, regarding people, finding young people who are proud to build with bricks. And that's what I'm struggling every day. You can think the craziest ideas, design the craziest idea, but I'm very often missing the people who can help us to realize a project of a new structure or an experiment. And as you told, it's a combination of the bricklayers and the architect. And bricklayers are, for me, also more important than the engineers. And for that topic, I completely agree with you. So.
Okay, I also heard in both your presentations that although it is a material with a very long history, you both claim not to be nostalgic about it and to be looking ahead, looking into the future in testing and developing new ideas concerning the material. So I think that with this, I would like to close this conversation. Thank you so much, Tom, David, Anupama.
Thank you.
Big hand.